Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast, brought to you by Small House Farm. Join us as we talk with gardeners, foragers, herbalists, chefs, and community activists to explore the many ways that plants impact our cultures and cuisines, our history, and our future. I'm your host, Bevin, and this is Seeds and Weeds. Hello again, and welcome back to the podcast. You are in for a treat today. We're going to be sitting down with Dr. Matthew Kost to talk about growing regionally adapted seeds. We're going to cover why regionally adapted seeds are important, how to develop these adapted seeds, creating and maintaining landraces, where to purchase quality seed, and so much more. This interview is just packed with information, so you don't want to miss it. Here at Small House, we pretty much got everything planted now. I just got the last of the beans in. Actually, the last variety that went in is Harsen's Island pole bean, which is a variety that's been grown for generations on Harsen's Island right here in Michigan. Now, if you're not familiar, Harsen's Island is in Lake St. Clair. It's right on the border with Canada. I got the seeds from my good friend Karen Golden, who has a cottage right there on the island. Karen owns and operates a greenhouse in Highland, Michigan, which is called Michigan Heirlooms. We were just down there for an event. It was the opening of her plant sale season, and we were there as vendors with our small house table. It was super fun. You know, we don't really set up as vendors nearly as much as we used to, and it's so nice just to see folks and talk about plants and all that good stuff. And while we were there, Karen shared some of these special beans with me, so I'm pretty excited to be growing them. It's a Michigan heirloom, right? Which means that the variety is adapted to my bioregion, and we're going to learn all about how important that is when we get into the interview with Dr. Kost. Now that everything's planted, we're actually going on a little camping trip just to relax and, have some fun. Even though it's a busy time of year, it's important to remember to take time for yourself and enjoy the season, because it'll be gone before we know it. Aside from planting, we've been busy getting the seasonal gift boxes together for our Patreon community. If you're not familiar now, every solstice and equinox, we send out a package full of seasonal herbal products and other handcrafted goodies to our patrons. It's just our way of showing our appreciation for their continued support. Now, I don't want to spoil any surprises about what's in the summer box, but let's just say that this might be our best gift box yet. And if you want to check it out and learn more about our Patreon community, how you can support the podcast, you can find that link down in the show notes or over on our website or directly at patreon.com/smallhousefarm. Dr. Matthew Kost is originally from Kansas City and has returned home after obtaining a Bachelor in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from the University of Kansas and a Ph.D. in Evolutionary Agroecology from the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science at Ohio State University. Matthew has also worked in conserving amaranth and quinoa landrace diversity in Peru and arid adapted crops in the greater Southwest. He's currently focused on seed diversity in the United States and Jamaica. Matthew's joining us on the show today to talk about the Buffalo Seed Company and growing regionally adapted seeds. Matthew, welcome to the show, my friend. I am super excited to have you here with us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk as well and to kind of explain what we're doing and catch up with you a little bit as well.
Now, I got quite a bit that I'd like to cover today, but before we jump into it, you and your wife, Nancy, own the Buffalo Seed Company down in Kansas. And before we get into all that, could you share a little bit about your background and what led you to launching the Buffalo Seed Company?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. So I studied evolutionary biology at the University of Kansas for my undergraduate, and I was doing some research over there on kind of studying the evolution of flower shape and how pollinators affect that. And I was looking, millions of years deep into evolution to kind of untangle that. We're actually using some transgenic approaches, which was kind of interesting. But then I was reading some articles from a researcher by the name of Ignacio Chapella out in California that was talking about how we were genetically engineering our food system. And it was one of those aha moments. I ended up shortly after that quitting the lab that I was working in and kind of shifted my gears into first looking at the negative effects of transgenics on diversity in sunflower, and then ended up just really kind of getting more into the agricultural sector and looking at crop diversity down in Latin America. And anyway, fast forward, I did a little bit of work down in South America with land races of quinoa and amaranth. And then I was director of conservation out at Native native seeds out in, or native seed search out in Tucson for a while. And then we decided that we wanted to get back to my roots over here in Kansas, and worked with a few farm organizations here in Kansas. And then Nancy and I decided we were going to launch the Buffalo Seed Company. And so that's kind of how that came about.
Fascinating. So let's dig into this topic of bioregional seeds. On your website, it says the Buffalo Seed Company supplies growers with bioregionally adapting seeds to increase the resiliency and sustainability of our local food system. So could you unpack that for us a little bit? What do you mean by bioregionally adapting seeds, and then the impact that these seeds would have on a resilient, sustainable food system? I know that's a big question, but if you could unpack that a little bit for us, that would be great.
Throughout the years, like I said, I'd spent some time. I've always worked with crop diversity for quite a number of years. And while down in Chiapas, Mexico, I was working on corn diversity, and I was studying local adaptation down in that region. And that was when I was really introduced to land races of corn. And I had land races from high elevations, and I had land races from lower elevations. And long story short, you can basically figure out if the lowlands do better in the lowland environments and the highlands do better in the highland environments. And when you switch them, they do worse, then that's a signal of local adaptation. And so what ends up happening is if you have a diverse land race and you put it into a specific location and you grow it year after year after year, the local environment will begin to shape the diversity of that population. And also the human culture will begin to shape it to the kind of food and dishes that they like to prepare. So when we're talking about bioregional adaptation, we're talking about getting crops into the bioregion, and we have a number of approaches that we'll take to do that. But to really get diversity into our bioregion and allow evolution to take shape on it over years. So that's kind of where the bioregional adaptation piece comes in. Now, as far as increasing resiliency and sustainability of our local food systems, the idea of, first off, having a local seed system is integral to where the seed system itself continues to adapt to change. So that's kind of where the resiliency and sustainability piece come into that text.
All right, let's maybe describe a couple of these words a little bit more for our listeners. You've used the word landrace a number of times. Could you define that for the folks tuning in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of definitions floating out there. Our general definition is a diverse population that has been shaped by a local environment that is culturally significant. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Well, you have, a population. So let's say you have a corn population. Now, a land race, they're generally diverse. So you put that out in your garden, and let's say, a fungus comes through and maybe it kills 3 or 4 of your plants, but the rest of the population of your variety there stays alive. Okay, so this is a selective pressure. So over time, this land race is adapting into your space. Okay, so that's what a land race is. So a land race, they're generally locally adapted, meaning that they're starting to evolve to your place, your space, and your personal preference. So there's an adaptation piece involved with local land races as well.
Sure. So there's a lot of diversity in the seed. It's able to adapt quickly to whatever environment it's in because of that diversity.
Yes, that's correct. There's kind of a gradient. The way I look at it, there's a gradient. So you have diversity on one side and you have local adaptation on the other side. Okay. So you have to imagine if you took a really diverse corn variety, with all different colors and different abilities to deal with water and temperature and all of this, and you let it get selected by your natural environment. Okay, so over time, what will happen is it will become more adapted, but when that occurs, you'll also be losing diversity. Okay, as it further adapts to your location. There's kind of this interplay between adaptation and diversity. And generally, land races, if they're healthy land races, kind of mix and match that adaptation and that diversity. So you've got the ability to perform well in a location, but you also have that option value of being able to cope with change in the climate, and I think that's extremely relevant given our current times where, the environment's extremely extremely unpredictable. So, having that diversity allows you to kind of cope with that a little bit.
Absolutely. You mentioned the cultural significance, the cultural connection that the landrace seeds have. Could you tell us more about that?
I think my introduction to it was really down in Latin America. So the different land races of corn, there's specific land races grown for specific dishes, if you will, whether it's grinding down corn for a powder to make drinks with, or whether you're making elotes or tortillas. So the actual textures and the colors and the taste and all of this, they get tailored over time as well. So, if you have a diverse population and some of the peppers are hotter than others and your culture likes hot peppers, over time, that would be selected on. So you would start to dial that land race into your cultural preferences. I think the real eye opener was when I was with Nancy down in Bolivia. She's from the Altiplano, so real high elevation where they grow potatoes and quinoa. And her grandfather, I was talking with him, and he stewarded upwards of 50 different varieties of potatoes. And I was talking with him about that. And he was saying, we have a different potato for basically every dish, that we've been keeping these traditional dishes going for however long. So over time, those taste and textures and colors and flavors and, just the story behind the whole crop has, really dialed into a permanent place within the culture. Right. We must remember that we're simply part of the ecosystem, right? So we're not separated from it. So ultimately, we're like the bees or the environment, the rain or the temperature, right? So we're just another factor in that big mix. So when we're talking the cultural piece of the evolution of land races, we're simply discussing the fact that we're part of that ecosystem and that we shape these crops as they continue on their journey of evolution, that they've been on for the last 10,000 years.
So in a way, it's almost like we're just another environmental factor that the plants are adapting to.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I mean, the best way to put it without getting too complex about it is our DNA is a memory of past environments. And the question is how do past environments coincide with current environments? Okay, so if your DNA, which is a memory of past environments, matches the current environment well, then your phenotype or yourself will do well, right? And so this is kind of the foundation of evolutionary thought.
On your website, the seeds are described as open pollinated, no chemicals, watered only by direct rainfall, local mulch, organic fertilizers, non-GMO. And that really got my attention, this watered only by direct rainfall. So let's explore that a little bit. Why would you choose to grow your plants that way? And what impact does that have then on the seeds that you produce?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously rainfall is a major component of our growing environment, right? We've got temperature, it's always a factor, water, and then, insect pressures and bacteria. But here in Kansas City, the weather patterns, what happens is in the springtime, we usually get some pretty good rains. And right about now, the rains start dropping off quite a bit. It starts getting real dry and the pressures get real heavy kind of later in the season. So if we water the plants, we're not allowing our crops to really get used to this environment without continuing to water them. So the idea is that we put these out, we get the crops out, and we let nature do what it does. Okay. So year after year, if the crops cannot handle the natural rain patterns of our area, then we can't offer them to anybody because they don't produce. Right. So what we end up with over time is crops, and varieties that can withstand these kind of patterns. And it's a pretty wild situation to do that. I mean, we're stewarding these seeds. We're running a business, right? And this is how we feed our family. So it's it gets a little hairy. But the thing is the crops we trust that they can handle it at this point because we've been doing it for years and they handle fairly well. So if we have land races, what you'll find out is put a corn population out, for example. You might see, 10 or 20% of it die because the rains didn't come. So as breeders and, running a seed company like this, we like to see that because we know at that point that this variety is starting to, anchor into the ecosystem, right? So that's kind of where that factor came from is, we really just wanted to put the seeds on the landscape to be able to match their genetics to the environment. And in order to do that, we minimize any type of inputs that we put into the system.
Sort of survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah, one way or the other, there's mechanisms that are taking place that are evolving these things to the location that we're in. As well, and there's a lot of seed companies out there that have quite a different model than what we're talking about here, which, it's not to be talking negatively on it. It's just a different model, right? Where there's a lot of seeds that are brought in from, they're not grown within that bioregion. They're brought in from different locations. Oftentimes there's trials performed. So there is a glimpse into being able to see what can do well here. The piece that's missing is the continued adaptation year after year after year to the exact kind of bioregional location, and also the cultural selection piece to a given bioregion. So we're really wanting to start to strengthen this concept to try to provide a solution to strengthening and making our seed and food systems more resilient, sustainable in a changing climate.
So my next question was going to be, for folks that are interested in growing these regionally adapted crops, what kind of advice do you have to get them started? But I think you kind of touched on that. It's finding some of these regionally adapted seeds, perhaps. And there are so many seed companies. I can obviously just Google seed companies and I could find seed companies in my area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those seed companies are even selling seeds that are grown in this area, or let alone adapted to this area by any means, right? So how do we find regionally adapted seeds? Or if we can't find any, how do we create some? So I guess that's a two-part question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the thing that separates our company from other companies is just that piece, right? We grow them right here. And there's a number of companies, really great companies across the country that do the same. I mean, check out the websites. Does it say they're locally produced? Generally, the companies that are doing the local production tend to be smaller companies. So, look at some smaller companies in the area. That's a great place to start. If you can't identify that around you, which in that case, just begin to make your own land races. Some people call it, like I said, they call them ultra crosses, or, there's a number of different names for these. Grex populations and, these technical terms. But regardless, you can go to a number of companies and say, okay, I want sweet bell peppers. Okay. And, maybe you buy 5 or 6 different varieties of sweet bell peppers and mix them together and plant them out. And then once again, let the ecosystem start figuring out if it likes certain ones better than other ones. Right. And then give it a year or two to kind of let it settle out. And, what we see when we do this approach, after 2 or 3 years, you start seeing better production, right? You start seeing more uniform production. Not as many plants are dying. And then, like we were talking before, then if there's some variation in the bell pepper, there's some red ones or there's some whatever color or taste or texture, you can start selecting on that. So if you cannot access them, you can just create them. And if you go down that route of creating them and getting them into your, local environment, you just save the seeds year after year after year, and start sharing them with your network of people. And, over time, you start developing something that is fit for that location and that the local culture, starts bringing into their local cuisine. When you go to the centers of origin of crops, so corn down in southern Mexico or potatoes up in the Altiplano of South America, these locations, these are where the land races are historically at. You go to the locations where the crop was domesticated, and that's generally where a majority of that diversity resides. But, we can also begin to take some of these ideas and implement them in our locations here as well.
I think it's interesting to think about how, like, for us, it seems to be very intentional. And the things that you're doing are almost, we could say, cutting edge, right? Like this idea of these regionally adapted food crops and land races and all this sort of thing. For gardeners here in the States, these are relatively new ideas. But in these centers of origin, I would almost think that this whole idea, this is like a no-brainer, right? You want to grow the crops that are going to perform the best for you. So you have the diversity to find them, and then you shape it to what you like to eat. And that just seems like very obvious.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. I mean, this approach that we're talking about, up in the States, it sounds like a radical new idea, but you're exactly right. I mean, this is how our ancestors, as a global community, our ancestors have basically domesticated crops and maintained them for, the last 10,000 years. Like, if you really get down to the fundamentals of what breeding is and what growing food is and, what humans anchor into the ecology through food is, it's a real fundamentally simple thing. You have diversity, you let the environment shape it, you select what you like. So if you go down into the centers of origin, like I remember down in southern Mexico with the corn, I mean, the knowledge base it's deep. This is where I learned these concepts, was down in Mexico. And now Nancy and I, we met up in Ohio, and, she grew up growing potatoes and quinoa and raising llamas up in the Altiplano and really rural areas. So these concepts to her, she came up to the U.S. to study tomato breeding up at Ohio State University. And she already had this depth of knowledge. So when we crossed paths, it was like two different worlds combining. And this is what's come out of it. We understand all the kind of the Western science background of it, but there's a point where the whole Western science background and the way we've been doing it for the last 10,000 years coincide. And the fact of the matter is, you just save seeds from the things that you like, and you use diversity to allow the ecosystem to shape it.
Simple as that. I absolutely love that. What's the link that folks are going to need so they can check out your website and shop for some regionally adapted seeds from the Buffalo Seed Company?
Yeah, so our website is thebuffaloseedcompany.com, and find all of our varieties there. Please check us out, and please feel free to reach out. We love talking about these ideas and, anything about growing crops or anything. We just love talking about seeds and about growing things and community.
Awesome. Matthew, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it. That was super fun.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Can you believe it? Here we are once again at the end of another show. Big thanks to Dr. Kost for being our guest today, and to all of you for tuning in. Remember, if you enjoy the podcast and would like to show your support, you can always join our Patreon community. You can find that link and so much more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm, and the music we're enjoying right now is called Fiesta Forever by Monument Music. Thanks again for joining us, friends. I'm Bevin Cohen, and we'll see you next time.